SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
A report by Orme-Claye has warned authorities and stakeholders of the visible pathways that the black market has exposed to engage with British audiences. The Harm Prevention Organization has drawn attention to why consumers of a safe and regulated market would choose to play with illegal operators. The black market's encroachment is deemed an evolving threat to UK gambling during a time of regulatory change in which liabilities in compliance, standards and regulations will be exposed by bad actors. I'm Viktor, senior journalist with SBC News. I'm joined today by my editor, Ted O.C., and SBC's editor-in-large, Ted Menmuir, to discuss the latest from Orme-Claye. But before that, iGaming Daily is sponsored by Optimove, the #1 CRM and marketing solution for the global gambling sector. All right, now, hey gents, how are you doing? Ted O.C.
I'm good, thank you, Victor. Yeah, had a good weekend, enjoying the sun, and look forward to taking on this report. There's quite a few interesting things to dive into here.
Yeah, it's definitely of interest. Ted Menmuir, how are you doing, mate?
Oh, very well, very well. My weekend came out.
Thanks for joining us
today
from London. So let's head straight into it. So my first question is it is a new black market report, and it's by the DMO, the Orme-Claye. What is it actually highlighting? I'm going to start here with Ted O.C. because you're in the office with me. Tell us what's going on and what is being highlighted by the organization.
Sure thing, Victor. So the report it's an interesting one. It's not quite as wide-ranging or deeply researched, I guess, as a lot of other industry reports we've seen over recent years, but it has come out with some quite interesting findings and highlights. It's reiterated an argument that's been made by a lot of different betting stakeholders, including operators, researchers, and some harm prevention organisations like Orme-Claye over the past few years, about the potential negative outcomes of regulation and regulatory changes on player protection, particularly the idea that some players at least, will react badly to new regulations, and as a result move towards black market firms where they don't come up against as many barriers. That's really sort of one of the main arguments. I think quite an interesting finding from it was that, according to a lot of the adults, I think that the Orme-Claye spoke to, who said they were banned from all UK regulated online websites, you know what I mean, online betting companies, online casino firms, whatever, were actually accessing black market firms instead. So they'd banned themselves via GamStop and have now moved to just continue betting via black market firms who obviously aren't signed up to GamStop, aren't banned via it. So I think that was quite an interesting one that just shows that people are still finding a way to continue gambling and continue facing the harms they get just via a site that just isn't licensed, that isn't part of the regulated ecosystem.
Yeah, I think I agree here with you. One of the things that stood out for me was that black market operators were specifically targeting consumers who were looking for websites that are not on the GamStop, that are not on the GamStop list. And non-GamStop was actually the most searched for keyword in search engine. So it's actually actively being used as a SEO optimization tool. Non-GamStop, as wild as this sounds. Ted Menmuir, what was the highlight for you from the report?
Looking at it as a report, first of all, I'm going to say that it's eye-catching and it's a good read. And that actually does make a difference for a report, right? Because we do get a lot of this as journalists. The thing that's kind of glaring out of it is when they mention kind of the pathways and how easy it is for the consumer to bypass. I think what is also important is that the way they present the player. Yes, they speak about the vulnerable cases, but they also speak about the player just wanting to gamble. And if you've used kind of restrictions, that there is an appeal carried by the black market. And then they put themselves in this system where it's so easy to gain access to these black market websites. And that's even in the case of kind of regulatory compliance where they'd actually take down the websites within 24 hours to back up. So there's a lot of kind of hands-tied elements about this report. And I also like that it's actually quite a ballsy report. I mean, it does its own survey. It goes out, it interviews people with like lived experience of playing on the black market. And I think that's been kind of a blind spot for researchers in the past, because it's so hard to actually judge the size of the black market's encroachment, especially in a licensed market such as the UK.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I'm going to add here, this is my own personal opinion, the players that you mentioned, that are mentioned in the report, the ones who gamble responsibly but go out of their way to look for black market operators, in my own opinion, I think these players should also be referred at risk of problem gambling and not gambling responsibly. Because if you are a player, for me, you are not a responsible gambler if you deliberately avoid responsible gambling measures. And to me, the fact that there is an inability to understand why these measures are there or to consciously reject them is definitely a sign of irresponsible behavior. But yeah, that's just a note I wanted to add from the report that I had some thoughts on. Maybe it's not true for everybody. This is my own personal opinion. But yeah, moving on to the second question. Ted's OC, the ball is again with you. Why has this report caught the industry's attention?
So, this, obviously, as we've talked about a lot on this podcast, more times than I can count, the UK has been undergoing some really significant regulatory changes over the past few years. We had the Gambling Act review that obviously started in 2020, the review was finally published in April 2023, the white paper on it, I should say. That took 2.5 years. In the year and a bit we've seen since then, we've been seeing loads of UK Gambling Commission consultations. We're seeing the recommendations come about. The UK has been undergoing this huge shift to try and upgrade the industry to meet, so its regulations and the legislation behind it meets the demands of the online market, and most importantly, protects the players behind it. I think this report has caught the industry's eye because I think it's raising the question again as to whether some of the changes we've been pursuing may have actually had a potentially detrimental impact on player protection for some people. Is whether some people have slipped through the gaps, slipped through the cracks of regulatory changes, and whether or not the illicit side of gaming, the unlicensed firms, have been adequately addressed enough in these reviews and these reforms. Obviously, the licensed industry has a huge responsibility on its shoulders to protect players. That is, ultimately, the vast majority of players do gamble with the licensed industry, the regulated industry, and operators in that need to make sure they are protecting players. That is extremely important. But we do also need to be making sure that there aren't some people who are being kind of forgotten about in all this, which are the people who clearly have such a big problem with, let's say, gambling addiction, with problem gambling, that even after they've excluded themselves from the licensed offering, then go out there to try and find an unlicensed alternative. Like, as you said, Victor, lots of people were found to be searching non-GamStop casinos or non-GamStop bookmakers because they clearly had that need to gamble so badly.
Yeah.
So I think it seems like there's been this report seems to suggest that there's been a bit of a blind spot, I guess, a regulatory blind spot, and I think that's what's caught people's attention. I don't know if you agree with me on that one, Ted, but if you might have a different perspective.
I think you put it kind of too kindly, actually. I think what the report is kind of saying is that it appears to me that in the UK gambling, in its current framework, it's that you're out once you self-exclude. You just become completely exposed to the black market sector, or to bad actors. And that's because the regime is either, it's a coin flip. It's either one or the other. You're either playing gaming or you're not. And I think that in an open environment such as the internet, at one point, anyone who's self-excluded has that urge to go, oh, I can just bypass GAMSTOP self-exclusion. I can look at that term. And that's what, going back to what Viktor was highlighting on what the SEO shows, that's clear evidence. And again, it's going back to, for me, these pathways that it underlines that are so open and they're just there to be kind of abused. And not only on your SEO, but on YouTube and other social media platforms. I think that it is right that if we're going to challenge the black market, it needs to be kind of a coalition of all stakeholders involved, from your regulatory authorities.
I wanna explore this in more depth. You mentioned the pathways into the black market. Ted, take us through them. What was listed in the report itself?
Well, okay. The pathways was, yes, you start your online channels. Mm-hmm. The other thing that was really, really glaring was the promotion of streams, especially to kind of younger audiences. Also, the black market's involvement or kind of encroachment with younger audiences or kind of that age range of youth players. And the fact that black market operators know how to promote their products against against regulatory restrictions, especially when it comes to promoting slots. So you're offering the player no deposit limits, no verification, autonomous play. Also, another pathway that was mentioned was the use of crypto, but that's just another case on its own. And I think that it looks at kind of these pathways and saying, look, yes, the UK gambling is transitioning to kind of a new compliance framework and a new regulatory framework, but in that, it's kind of blindsided by the fact that your customers know what they want to play on. And your regular Joe might just go, well, look, I like that slot and I like my play not to be interrupted, so I'm going to choose a black market operator over a regulated website. And in a sense, it's kind of that is kind of organic, and I think that is kind of a glaring fault or a glaring fault line for UK gambling.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Ted's been saying. I think a good takeaway to take from this is that the industry and regulators need to look at how we can approach this beyond self-exclusion. There's kind of almost like an idea of like, right, you're excluded, that's it. It's the problem sort of, that's not the end of the issue, is it? That's not the silver bullet to someone who's got a problem with gambling, who's encountering a lot of harm. Once you've excluded yourself, there's still ways you can gamble that are arguably far worse than just being able to wander into a high street bookies or something like that. You've got these companies that have no protection available, that use a lot of underhand tactics to target players to keep them looped in, that apparently, according to a lot of findings in this report, will often not even deliver winnings when players do win. So yeah, you can't just view it as if, oh right, they're excluded from gambling, that's it, their problem's over. You need to look at the actual the things behind it themselves, right? The mental problems, the sort of mental and emotional difficulties that people might have, financial difficulties they might have, and how you can prevent that, educate about that, and treat that. Just self-excluding isn't going to stop that. You've got to look beyond it, I think.
I agree, but it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you have to look at the root of the problem, which is the black market operators themselves, and you can't really do anything to stop them, really, because they're always gonna find a way to make to engage with the customer, regardless of whether they are self-excluded or not. I think it's the key here lies in making the UK regulated gambling industry more appealing. Because people go to the black market currently. Those who go there go because they find something that they don't have on the regulated market. So I think the solution to this problem could hide in making the regulated market more appealing. And one thing that the regulated market, I think, has over the black market is that the licensed regime is the innovator. Whatever it implements, it then finds its way to the black market. The black market copies. So the advantage here is that the license regime is the innovator, and it needs to, like auto spins, let's say, bonus buys, stake limits, etc. They were all part of the licensed regime until they get banned. Before we go on, we're gonna go into a short ad break, and we're gonna be with you shortly.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
All right, we're back. What does the report tell us about players and why they choose to go to these illegal platforms? Obviously,
I think, like I said in the first half, a big factor is obviously people facing problem gambling and gambling addiction. Anyway, that's the big underlying factor, right, as to why someone would. Certainly, in the case of the self-excluded players, like I should clarify, in the case of people who've self-excluded and continue to gamble and bet via black market sites, that's because they have an underlying problem that needs treating, right, that needs addressing. So there's that. On top of that as well, I think for more generally, you've got the issue that people in many cases might not even be aware that the site they're gambling on is a black market site, right? Like these sites present themselves as just like any other bookmaker, any other casino. So when a lot of customers who might not be as familiar with the layout of the industry, with licensing and things like that, go on there, they don't even know that they're gambling with a company that isn't paying tax, that isn't licensed, that doesn't have the right player protection requirements, right?
Yeah. Can I just add, I think you've got to give Deal Me Out a lot of credit here in how it's presented the player. Because we read a lot of reports where the player's kind of viewed as this very kind of static being, right, that has no kind of conscience or understands what he's doing. And I think one of the things that this report is kind of telling us, right, is that, look, if you are a vulnerable player and if you've been at risk or if you have had addiction, you do have some experience of gambling and you do actually know kind of your choices and how to play these games and what is expected out of a product. So if you then kind of relapse and go back into the market, right, you're not going to play with a regulated product that isn't up to scratch. I also think that it's very right to kind of underline that once they head towards the black market, right, there is kind of a blind spot of the criminality that the player might be engaged to, right, to fund his gambling addiction, which you can't tell once he goes off grid. So that's another issue of how do you kind of calculate the actual liability of the black market and its encroachment and its actual impact on the general regulated and, social well-being of the UK.
I think that's a good point, yeah. Like what Ted said, I think it's important to highlight how what's quite interesting with this report is it has just, like Ted has said, gone beyond just seeing customers or the players like another statistic as just an all-round mass market sort of thing. Like these are individual people with their own preferences and their own reasons and motivations and so on that are very wide-ranging as to why they would engage with these sites. I think another thing to actually mention, just as a bit of a side note to this, is also just the way these sites market themselves and reach out to people. Yeah. It was highlighted quite a lot during this report, the impact of influencers, like online social media, some personalities, YouTubers, whoever they might be, getting paid to promote these sites. And many of them might not even be aware of what it is they're exactly promoting either. They might just be doing it for a quick paycheck. But that in this very digitally native industry we're now in, a very digitally engaged and driven one, that's quite a significant way for these companies to reach out to people and reel more people in. I think that was a very interesting takeaway from that.
One of the ways that they reach to these players from that I get to learn from the report was through emails. But there is also, you mentioned, Ted, the digital world that we currently live in. Obviously, social media is a big part of it. So why is social media and social media platforms in general a point of exposure for vulnerable players? Menmuir?
I think that we have to kind of look at this holistically. It's not just the case of a consumer is exposed on a social media channel. I think we've seen this across other industries. Just how open these platforms are to kind of promote anything. And then the other thing is like, where is the accountability held with these platforms? You know, who is monitoring them? Who monitors the content? Who kind of oversees that, you know, vulnerable people aren't engaging with gambling advertising on Facebook, on your Instagrams. It's, for me, that is kind of like the kind of point of inflection here. I mean, if I was advised in the UKGC, I'd say, look, you really need to concentrate there and kind of close that loophole. But again, everything points to, I think we're heading towards the resolution for the regulated markets. And I think that it's just going to be kind of like, we have to wait and see what transfers there onto what is actually the black market threat.
Mm-hmm. Ted Ossie, do you agree with Ted Menmuir, how these pathways to the black market can be closed if the UKGC just focuses on it? Would it be possible?
Yeah, I think Ted's kind of hit the nail on the head there of the word holistic. We need a holistic approach. I think it needs to be as collaborative as possible. There needs to be a lot of different people involved. The UKGC needs to make sure it's working with the operators themselves, law enforcement, preventative and educational organisations like Deal Me Out, and also, I guess, like a lot of the big tech and social media firms themselves. If we're going to, mentioning the influencer side of things and stuff like that, and how these companies reach out to people, you're going to have to engage with the likes of Meta and Google and so on. So yeah, it needs to be an all-round, all-encompassing approach to make sure that this risk is being addressed, I think.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you, guys, for these insightful comments on the report. I urge anyone listening to go have a read. It's a really important, I think, for the industry report. It's well made as well, with lots of examples and lived experiences, and there is obviously a lot of thought put into it. Thank you for listening to today's episode. We're gonna see you next time.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.